What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the assault rifles for longer range. So I'll go over all the different ARs that I think are viable right now and talk about which ones win which situations. Before we get into that, I have a sponsored segment for this video, so we're going to go through that. As always, if you guys like the content, consider dropping that sub. It really helps us out and helps us grow and keep doing this, so it's always appreciated. But let's jump into the sponsored segment, and then we will get directly into comparing the assault rifles. Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. So if you don't know what a VPN is, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. Essentially what that means is all of your data is encrypted and sent to a NordVPN server, and then from there it goes to the internet. So you get this encrypted tunnel for all of your information. One of the main things NordVPN can help you with is just simply browsing the internet safely. There's all kinds of outside sources that want to see what you're looking at so they can sell that information, make money from that information, or hack you, or all kinds of different things. NordVPN basically will provide you with this secure encrypted tunnel to the internet, so it'll go straight to a NordVPN server and then to the internet after that, and your information will never be available to the public. So something that NordVPN can do is it can essentially make you look like you're somewhere else in the world when you're browsing the internet. So you can just connect to a server anywhere in the world and it looks like your computer is in that location. So if there's region locked software, region locked games, region locked content on any sort of video platform where you're not allowed to watch a certain show or something, if you turn on NordVPN and connect to that country, you'll just be able to watch that or download that game or anything. So it's a really convenient way to do that as far as region locked software or videos. Something else, it'll help you avoid DDoS attacks. It helps you block malware ridden websites. It's just overall a safer way to browse the internet. So I just want to quickly show how simple it is to use NordVPN. So I'm on my PC here. I download the software. All I have to do is log in and then launch the app. It'll be down in your tray. You can navigate to anywhere in the world. If I want to look like I'm in Japan, all I have to do is go to Japan and click connect to Japan, and it literally just takes a few seconds. It's super simple and easy to use. So if you're interested in checking out NordVPN, just a safer way to browse the internet, get access to content that's normally restricted in your country, simply go to nordvpn.com/TrueGameData. With my special code, you'll get a 2-year plan plus a bonus gift at a huge discount compared to their normal rate. So be sure to check that out, and thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. All right, so quickly, I want to cover what builds I'm using to compare in this video. So literally everything I talk about in this whole video is going to be using this build for each gun. So basically just the best long range build is always going to be a GRU suppressor, Task Force, or Spetsnaz, RPK, whatever name it has, just the last barrel for the Cold War guns. Then the underbarrel is going to be the Field Agent / Spetsnaz grip, the one that helps with the vertical and horizontal recoil. Magazine for the Cold War AK and the C58, we use the 45 round, but then for the other guns we use the first 60 round mag. And then Axial Arms 3X is pretty much the go-to on all of the Cold War guns. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through all the different guns and talk about which ones are going to make my list and which ones aren't. So Modern Warfare AK-47 has too much recoil and it has Modern Warfare movement, so that's not going to make my list. Cold War AK has Cold War movement and has very good TTKs, good reload time, everything, so that's definitely going to make the list of top ARs. AN-94 doesn't have the TTKs and it's a Modern Warfare gun again. If you were curious, this is no hyperburst, so you can look at the TTK of the AN-94 without hyperburst on the website. I've never mentioned that. AS-VAL is fantastic, but only has that 30 round mag, and it's really only good for like SMG use, not long range, which is what this video is about. So that's not going to make it. C58, the new AR, very slow fire rate, but pretty good TTKs, good reload times, good movement. It's a good gun, so it's going to make the list. AMAX is still pretty good even after all the nerfs, but I just think there's better alternatives in the Cold War guns now, especially with the barrel changes. So the AMAX is actually not going to make the list. You can still use it, it's still good. I just think statistically there's some better options out there that are the Cold War guns, so we're not going to include that. FAL, obviously fantastic TTKs. It's really hard to use in practice because you can't fire it at a consistent fire rate, which makes the recoil inconsistent, which means you can't really learn the recoil pattern and learn how to correct for the recoil. It really does have good TTKs though, so if you found a way to master it, it would be a good gun, but because I'm bad with it and I can't control that recoil effectively, it's not going to make my list of top guns. FARA, good TTKs, amazing recoil, really good visual recoil. Obviously that's going to be on the list. FFAR, FFAR is pretty good. The recoil is just a little too bad for really long range use, so that's why it's not going to make the list. But everything else about it's very good. It has good TTKs, and it's relatively controllable. It's borderline. It could potentially have been included, but I just think there's some slightly better options out there. Scar, obviously, terrible TTKs. It's 30 round mag. Yeah, Modern Warfare movement. It's just not very good. The FR556 is actually not that bad. Probably losing about half of you when I say that, but it's really not that bad. Still not going to include it though, because I just think certain other guns are better. Grau, great recoil. Still a really fun gun to use just because of the recoil. But again, we have that recoil now in some of the Cold War guns with these barrel changes. So the Grau, even though it has good recoil, doesn't have great TTKs compared to the Cold War guns, and it's just not going to make the list. Groza is much more of an SMG. It's not really made for long range, so that's not going to be included. Kilo, fantastic recoil, but horrible TTKs out past like 80 meters, and Modern Warfare stats for movement and things, so it's not going to be included. Krig, Krig's pretty good all around. It's just decent TTKs, really good recoil, really good visual recoil. It's a good gun, so it's going to make the list for long range. M13 Modern Warfare gun, so it has good recoil, but it doesn't have very good mobility, doesn't have very good TTKs, so it's not going to be included. M4 is actually really good still, Modern Warfare M4, but I'm not going to include it just because, again, there's better options in the Cold War guns because of the barrel changes. Odin, love the Odin, but it's just not really practical in terms of being the best gun right now, so we're not going to include it. QBZ, bad TTKs, obviously great mobility, but we're looking at long range, so we don't care that much about mobility. Obviously, mobility is always a good thing to have, but QBZ just doesn't have the TTKs for long range. Ram 7's great. Recoil's a little hard to control at range though, so for me, I'm not going to include it. I know in some communities the Ram 7 is huge, and people love it, but for me personally, I just think that some of the Cold War guns are a lot better. XM4 is fantastic right now. Great all-around gun, probably the best all-around gun. Just really good in all categories. So we're definitely going to include that, and its recoil is pretty good too, so we will definitely include that. And then LMGs, Ruin's in a good spot, but really slow mobility, which is painful. But it has good TTKs, and it's accurate, so it's pretty good, but I'm not going to include it just because of the really bad mobility and LMG characteristics. Finn is kind of broken right now. The adverse barrels don't work. It's probably the most accurate gun in the game, in my opinion, when you don't use the adverse barrels. So it's a decent option, especially if you're not good with recoil, but there's other good options like the Farah that have no recoil as well and have better TTKs and better reload and better movement. So that's why that Finn's not going to be on the list. Holger's just a worse M4 basically. Wouldn't recommend it. It's not going to be included. M60 is really bad. The recoil is really bad. The reload time, the mobility, everything is really bad. So that's not going to be there. M91. M91 is okay. It's kind of just like a worse Bruin right now though, so I'm not sure that I'd ever recommend using that. MG34. MG34 is basically a worse MG82, so I would not use the MG34. Really bad reload, horrible mobility, not recommended. MG82 is actually pretty decent, even after the nerfs, so that will be included on the list. Has good TTKs, good recoil, good visual recoil, so that's going to be on the list that we're going to include. PKM's great, really good TTKs, really easy to control recoil, but the mobility and the ADS times are just really bad, so I personally am not going to use the PKM. I think it's a decent option, but it's not going to be included on my list just because of that. The RAL never got released, unfortunately. It looks like it would have been really good, really fun to use, but never got released. RPD, really good recoil, but bad TTKs and obviously LMG reloads and things like that, so I am not going to include that. There's just better Cold War options. SA87 is decent. Has good TTKs, good reload time, decent ADS times, decent recoil. But again, it's just one of those guns, like I just think there's better options. I keep saying that, but it's true. There's just better options right now than the SA87, but it's not bad. Stoner is going to be included because it has good TTKs, Cold War mobility, decent recoil, but we'll show all of that. So those are the guns I'm going to include. The reason I'm not including The tactical rifles like the AUG, DMR, Carve, M16, they just don't have the bullet velocity anymore because they don't have a bullet velocity barrel except the task force, which hurts your recoil. So it's like, I hate that the guns are balanced that way. In my opinion, they should all have like decent bullet velocities and be balanced in other ways, like recoil and TTK. But for some reason, they've chosen to make the tactical rifles all have really bad bullet velocity, so that's why those aren't going to be included. All right, so if you made it through all that, the guns that made my list of top long-range guns right now would be the XM4, the FARA, the Cold War AK, C58, Krig, Stoner, and MG82. So these are all great guns. You'll notice that there's no Modern Warfare guns on this list, and that's just because I think the Cold War guns are better right now, and I've talked about this in the past. I think they might be trying to phase out the Modern Warfare guns in general, just because if they keep adding guns to Warzone and stuff, you can't possibly just continue adding forever. So I think at some point we'll see the Modern Warfare guns removed. I don't know. We'll see. That's just my tinfoil hat theory that they're trying to make the Modern Warfare guns just worse than the Cold War guns, just so they can phase out the Modern Warfare guns and not make people so upset when they get removed because nobody's going to be using them anyway. So right now, I just don't think any of the Modern Warfare guns compete with these Cold War guns, unfortunately. So what's important about a long-range AR? Basically, TTK and accuracy. A combination of the two things is easily what's the most important about a long-range AR. So accuracy is going to be weighted as number one in terms of what I consider to be the best gun. And then obviously, you also have to have a good TTK, but it doesn't have to be amazing, because if you hit your shots, you're still going to have really good TTKs compared to the other guns if other guns are missing. So we're going to look at TTKs, but keep in mind that accuracy is the most important thing for long range. So this is a 250 health chest shot with all of these builds, all of these guns that I've talked about. And right off the bat, the Cold War AK-47 easily has the best chest TTK. It has a really good chest multiplier, and it actually has, I've talked about this in other videos, but it has a pretty forgiving chest shot. I believe you can miss 2 chest shots and still get that that chest TTK, so that's really, really good. Very forgiving, even compared to like the AMAX and things. It's very forgiving in terms of TTK. Then that's followed up by, we're looking at long-range TTKs here because these are supposed to be long-range ARs, so we're mostly just looking out to the right, not really paying attention to the left. Obviously, in some situations, you will need to have these TTKs on the left when someone's close. So you can weight that somewhat, but again, the Cold War AK wins that as well. So looking out to the right, we have the Cold War AK, and then the Stoner actually wins over the Cold War AK in chest shots from like 37 meters out to about 60 meters. So there a lot of fights take place in that range. So the Stoner would be really, really good in that gap. But then out at longer ranges, Cold War AK followed by the C58, and then underneath the C58, you can't really see it, but there's a brown line underneath that green line, and that's the MG82. And then that's followed by the XM4, followed by the FARA, and then the Stoner and the Krig are the last out at long range. So the Stoner is really good in this 37 to 60 meter range, but then past that, it's very slow to kill. So it's only really good inside 60 meters. If we swap it over to extremities, you'll see something interesting here. The XM4 actually kind of takes over, and that's because the XM4 has that 5.56 damage profile where it doesn't have different damage values from chest to stomach to extremities. It's all the same. So you get the exact same extremities TTK as you do chest TTK with the XM4. So it feels really, really consistent to use. It's very, very good right now, all around. So that wins on extremities. In the pink line, the Stoner again actually wins from about 37 out to 60. So that's another same gap as before where the Stoner is really good. Cold War AK, the cyan line here is still really good. Still the second fastest up close and about the third fastest out at range. So overall, the Cold War AK just has fantastic TTKs. It has the best TTKs on average of the group for sure. But the XM4 is really consistent across the board. The FARA is also really good. Has great extremities TTK. A little bit better than the AK actually out at range for extremities. It just loses on chest shots to the AK. So FARA has like no recoil. It's super, super accurate. That's why so many people are using it right now. But I just wanted to briefly go over these TTKs. All right, so I kind of built, if you've watched my sniper videos, I build tables like this for the sniper videos. I thought it was a pretty good thing to do here for the assault rifles as well. So I've put those 6 weapons on the table, 7 weapons on the table, and then I kind of ranked them in terms of TTK, recoil, visual recoil, ADS time, damage per mag, movement, and reload times. So we'll just go through this one by one. TTK, as I just talked about, Cold War AK has the best TTKs. Really, really good TTKs across the board, and pretty forgiving chest TTKs, which is great. I ranked the XM4 as number 2 just because it's so consistent with that 5.56 damage profile across the board. It might lose to like the C58 on chest shots, but you're not ever going to hit those chest shots 100% almost. So I think the XM4 overall has a little bit better TTK. Followed up by the FARA in third. FARA has great TTKs as well. C58 has pretty good TTKs. Pretty much tied with the FARA. It has a chest multiplier unlike the FARA. So it's a really good option. It's just these 4 are all really close together. They're not like wildly different. The only one that really stands out here to me is the Cold War AK with faster TTKs. But the FARA, XM4, and C58 are all kind of trading blows. But I tried to rank them as best I could. And then 5th place I gave to the MG82. And this isn't just like, I'm not just saying chest TTK at range, like ranking them directly off their TTK numbers. This is combining all the different shot locations and TTK forgiveness and stuff. I'm not going through all the details, but I've thought about all that stuff when I'm ranking them here. So MG82 got 5th here, followed by the Stoner, and then Krig in last. Again, these aren't like massively worse than the top ones, but they are just a little bit worse, so that's why they're ranked that way. In terms of recoil, I will show you the recoil plot. I actually went and tested the recoil on all of these, and then ranked them here. So we'll go through that after this. Visual recoil, same. I went and tested this, and I should be able to show you that as well. ADS times. So ADS times are interesting because I don't have all of the mags on the website yet. So I couldn't actually use the 60 round mag for my comparison here, but basically what I did was I estimated what they would do, and I know that they're roughly about 50 milliseconds extra when you use a 60 round mag over a 45 round mag. So that's something that the Cold War AK and the C58 have. A big benefit over the other guns is because they have a slower fire rate and higher damage, you can use the 45 round mag and still get really good damage per mag, but that saves your ADS time. So your ADS times are much better on the 45 round mags. So even with the 60 round mag, the XM4 is going to be really close to the Cold War AK and C58. And obviously at range, ADS isn't super important. It's always important, but it's not as important on long range guns. So this shouldn't be weighted that highly. The most important are definitely these first 3 columns. But in terms of ADS, Cold War AK is number 1, followed by the XM4, because XM4 just has better base ADS. So even with the big mag, has good ADS times. Followed by the C58, followed by the Krig, followed by the FARA, and then obviously the LMGs are going to be a lot slower. Mag size, like I said, on the Cold War AK and the C58, I use 45 round mag instead of 60. You can use the 60 if you want gigantic amounts of damage per mag. You can easily, if you do this, 60 and then 55 for the C58, and you see the damage per mag goes up a ton. You get huge damage per mag if you do that. So if you're playing like solo trios or something like that, and you need a lot of damage per mag, those are really good options. But in terms of damage per mag, XM4 wins, followed by obviously the LMGs win. I didn't include the LMGs because they would have totally thrown off my color scale here just because they're so much higher. But obviously the LMGs win damage per mag. That's a no-brainer. They have over 2 times as much damage per mag. But XM4 wins damage per mag of the ARs, followed by the C58, followed by the Krig, followed by the AK, and then followed by FARA. So FARA has less damage per mag than the Cold War AK, even though it has 15 extra bullets. So just something to keep in mind. Movement, again, I didn't include LMGs because obviously LMGs are going to be quite a bit slower. The Krig has the best movement of this group, followed by the C58. and then the XM4 and Cold War AK are the same, and then the FARA is the slowest. So the FARA is basically like it's almost like an LMG. It has really bad reload times, super accurate, good TTKs, bad movement. It's bordering on LMG territory in terms of how it actually plays. Reload time, Cold War AK has amazing reload time. C58 also has great reload time. XM4's is pretty good. FARA's is really bad. I mean, if you've used the FARA, you know that. It's really slow. The Stoner, MG82 are both obviously LMGs, so they have really slow reload times. But summarize, I really think these 4 guns are all really good. The top 4. The Krig is really accurate, so that's one thing that it has. But I'll come back to this after we go over recoil and give you my final thoughts on which guns I think are the best for which situations. All right, so talking about recoil, like I said, most important thing. Accuracy is the most important thing at range. So I went in and I built these meta builds for all the different ARs and LMGs and compared them. So left to right here, we have XM4 on the left, followed by the FARA, followed by the Cold War AK, followed by the C58, followed by the Krig and the Stoner, MG82, and then I put the AMAX on the right just because I wanted something people knew what the recoil felt like to compare to visually. But you can look at this. Obviously, the FARA and the Krig have the best recoil. XM4 has pretty good recoil. Cold War AK has, like I said, it has a lot of vertical recoil, but it's really consistent, really nicely spread horizontally. So the Cold War AK, even though it has a lot of vertical recoil, is okay to control. It's not amazing at range, but it's okay to control. Krig has decent recoil, but it kind of has that little turn in it and has very, very little visual recoil, but it doesn't have great TTKs, so it's hard for me to recommend the Krig over the FARA right now just because the TTKs of the FARA are better and the recoil on the FARA is a little bit more straight vertical, and both of them have very, very little recoil. The Stoner over here looks like it has great recoil, but we'll see when we look at visual. There's so much visual bounce with the Stoner compared to the Krig or the FARA even. I have a really hard time recommending the Stoner right now, just because of the visual recoil mostly, to be honest. MG82 actually went off the board. These were all shot from the same distance. So the MG82 has tons of vertical recoil now, but it's still perfectly vertical and perfectly consistent with no horizontal bounce at all. So if you're really good at controlling vertical recoil, the MG82 is still going to be a good option. AMAX on the right here, it has a little bit less recoil than Cold War AK-47, but more recoil than literally every other Cold War gun here. So it's just not the play anymore for long range, especially when we have good TTKs with the FARA, good TTKs with the XM4, and really good TTKs with the Cold War AK. So I think the AMAX is just kind of out of it now. But yeah, the obvious winner here for me is the FARA. FARA has like no recoil, and then I'd say second place is the Krig. Third place, I would give to a tie between C58 and the XM4. Both really good recoil. Those are the top for me, definitely, of all these. All right, so let's go through the visual recoil real fast. Basically, this is just me shooting the sign that was probably 50 or 60 meters away. I just wanted something that I could compare all the different guns to. Normally, I'd put these side by side, but because we're comparing 7 different weapons, they couldn't fit on the same screen. So we're just going to go through them one at a time here. So starting with the XM4, each one of these is just 30 rounds fired at the sign. XM4 doesn't have very much visual recoil at all. FARA has even less. Cold War AK has a decent amount. C58 doesn't have very much, but it kind of like rotates a little bit around the center of the screen for some reason. Krig has very, very little visual recoil. Stoner has a bunch of bounce right at the start for some reason. And then the MG82 has almost none. So let's run through this one more time. XM4. FARA again has nothing. Cold War AK, quite a bit of recoil, quite a bit of visual recoil. C58, quite a bit on the first few shots, but it's not bad at all in terms of actual and visual recoil. Krig, very little. Stoner, a ton of bounce right at the start. And then the MG82, which has basically no visual recoil. All right, so going back to my rankings, I gave visual recoil a tie between MG82, Krig, and FARA, followed by the XM4, followed by the C58, followed by the Cold War AK, followed by the Stoner. I think the video that I just showed kind of proves that and shows why I'd say that. Actual recoil, I say that Krig and Farah have the best recoil. I think that's true. That's just actual wall pattern recoil. Farah maybe has a slight edge to me just because it's more vertical over those 30 bullets. C58 actually has very little recoil, very controllable. Then followed by the XM4, followed by the Cold War AK, and then the MG82 and the Stoner. So, big summary. I don't really think the MG82 or the Stoner really compete with the ARs right now. They're okay. They're not bad choices, but I just think there's some better options. Absolute best long-range gun. Everybody already knows this. It's the Farah right now. We don't care so much about movement. We don't care so much about reload times just because it's a long-range gun. ADS time doesn't matter that much, but it has no recoil at all, and it has very good TTKs. So that's pretty much why the Farah wins, is because it's really good in these three categories, especially accuracy. So recoil, visual recoil, fantastic. If you want the absolute best TTKs and you want to try to master a gun that's a little harder to use, but could potentially actually kill people quicker and better than the Farah, Cold War AK is probably the one to try to use. It has the best TTKs pretty much across the board. It's just much harder to control and has worse visual recoil. Another good option for a similar idea is the XM4. It doesn't have Cold War AK TTKs, but it has better TTKs than the Farah at range. But it's a little harder to control. But it has better ADS times, has a higher damage per mag, much better reload, better movement. So there are benefits to using the XM4. I think Farah and XM4 probably pretty much the top two for most people right now. Farah is just the easiest to use, no question. A lot of my controller friends actually love the C58. So if you're on controller, for some reason, I don't know what it is, but it seems like my friends that use controllers have migrated to the C58 pretty much. Not exclusively, but a lot of them really, really use it and like it a lot. So I would say if you're on controller, definitely give the C58 a shot. It has good numbers across the board. It doesn't really lack anywhere. It's just pretty good everywhere. Obviously, it has that slow fire rate, which isn't great for forgiveness if you miss a shot. But it's still a really, really good gun. I love the Cold War AK just because of the TTKs. The Krig is accurate, but I just think if you're going to use the Krig, there's just no reason not to use the Farah, because it's just basically a Krig with better TTKs. So that's kind of my thoughts on the Krig. But overall, you can't go wrong with any of these top four. They're all fantastic. I'd give them all a try and see what you like the most. I'm about to play in a tournament literally directly after this video goes live. I'll be playing in a tournament at twitch.tv/TrueGameData live at the Trios Customs tournament, and I'm trying to decide right now what I'm going to use. And I'm really torn between these three, because it's like Cold War AK has fantastic TTKs, which is really, really important. But it's not going to be nearly as good at range. XM4 is kind of the middle ground between the Farah and the AK, where it has better TTKs than the Farah, but better recoil than the Cold War AK. I think, I don't know. I'm torn. I'm going to run some practice games right after this video and try to decide between these three as my main AR for the tournament. I know people probably want me to just pick one of them and say it's the best. I don't really think you can do that, though. I think all four of those top guns are great. If I had to just say one was the best, the Farah. I mean, the Farah across the board is going to be the best for most people, just because it's so controllable and has such little recoil and still good TTKs. But there's different situations where every one of those guns is going to be better than the Farah. So it's hard for me to just say, go use the Farah. I think you should try all of these and pick which one works best for you. All right, well, this was a pretty long-winded, complex video. I tried to make it as short as possible, which doesn't ever really work for me, unfortunately. But hopefully, if you're here, you like the details. So as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. It really is great software to help you stay protected on the internet. So check them out if you want to help support the channel. And as always, I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video.